The other thing about that successive church age is that that's a very American thing. Tell the church in those countries where they are suffering persecution and being put to death, and tell them that they're in the church age of wealth and elitism, and that they're in the Laodicean church. It doesn't work. It seems that scheme is often, at least today, it's often an American. It focuses more on the American church and ignores the fact that there are other churches throughout the world. There are other situations among Christians that that scheme simply doesn't work.
Welcome back for part 2 of our 2-part conversation on the book of Revelation. For those of you who are joining us for part 2 first, Dr. David Mathewson is our guest, and I am so happy to be discussing this topic with him. If you did miss part 1, I highly recommend that you go back and catch it, but listening out of order won't be a problem either. To give you a little background, Dr. David Mathewson, he is an associate professor of New Testament at Denver Seminary and is a member of the Society for Biblical Literature. He earned a BA from Colorado Christian University, an MA from Denver Seminary, and his PhD in New Testament from the University of Aberdeen. Areas of research include the Book of Revelation, apocalyptic literature, Greek and linguistics, and biblical theology. And our last episode, we focused more on sort of the big picture aspects of Revelation, how to approach the text and things like that. And today we're going to get more into the details. And there are a lot of them. So we're just going to start running through these, and it's going to take what it takes. I'm excited to do it. Question 1. Some groups teach that the 7 churches of the province of Asia in Revelation are representative of 7 church ages, 7 different church ages, and that we're currently living in the last age. What do you think about this? What's your response to that?
Yeah, when you read first of all, the 7 churches are 7 actual churches that existed in the first century that John is addressing. So it doesn't appear that he's prophesying 7 successive ages, because he's addressing 7 churches that are actually going through the things that he speaks about in these 7 prophetic messages in chapters 2 and 3. And furthermore, two additional things. Number one is people that have approached Revelation like that, which has been going on for that view is not anything new. People have treated Revelation 2 and 3 that way. The 7 messages are forecasting 7 church ages. As time goes on, you have to keep revising that. As culture changes, history changes. And furthermore, the second point is when you look at those 7 messages, they have correspondences in every church. I can find examples of all 7 of those churches in today's world. And so the problems that they are addressing are not unique to separate ages, but seem to be the sorts of things that reoccur to some extent in every age. So again, not that I'm thinking of specific churches, but I can think of churches that face the same issues that you find in a number of those churches in chapters 2 and 3. So I'm personally hesitant to see chapters 2 and 3 as prophesying or forecasting 7 specific ages, as much as these churches are representative of the kinds of things that the church faced in the first century and continue to face until Christ comes back.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting and important point that you just made about we see these issues in every age. So there isn't this distinction of one versus the other, that we can even confidently draw a line from one to the next. And I'm curious, and you may not know this answer, so feel free to say that, but from the history of this being used, you said that this has been going on for so long. Has anyone ever thought they were not in the last one?
That's a good question. Well, and that's usually the thing. Most people do this because they're, again, it's a way of usually it's a way of plotting your existence on some timeline to see how close you are to the end. So if I can identify which age I'm in, then I can, even if you're not setting a specific date, I can say, well, we're in the seventh age, the Church of Laodicea being the last one. So we must be living very in or very close to the end. And so that's a very good point, that usually it is used as a way of trying to figure out how close I am, or we are, to the end.
Right. And I think within the area of religious abuse, so organizations, different forms of leadership that are using this, they're using it as leverage for obedience. Mm-hmm. So if they weren't in the last age, and people think, oh, we got time, which isn't really the message that's going to serve them. It's not going to, help their agenda to give people a sense of time, to get things straight. So it's typically, okay, we're almost out of time, so shape up. Right. And that is not a bad message. We're told, be at the ready. And so that isn't bad in and of itself. It's using things as evidence that maybe aren't actually evidence, and creating pressure for a specific agenda that doesn't necessarily align with Christ's agenda. That's where we start to get messy. That's
exactly right. And the other thing about that successive church age is that that's a very American thing. You look at the last, only 2 of the churches are undergoing any persecution. You look at the very last church in chapter 3, which should be the 7th, the age we're in, according to that scheme. Laodicea is very wealthy. They're arrogant. They're prideful of their position. They don't need anything. Tell the church in, tell the church in China, or tell the church in those countries where they are suffering persecution and being put to death, or having to meet and tell them that they're in the church age of wealth and elitism, and that they're in the Laodicean church. It doesn't work. So if that makes any sense, it seems that scheme is often, at least today, it's often an American. It focuses more on the American church and ignores the fact that there are other churches throughout the world. There are other situations among Christians that that scheme simply doesn't work.
Wow, that has me. I have a few people I want to reach out to now, and I know people in other places who have come out of groups where they have been taught this about the 7th age, and they're in other countries where they are not in the same position that we may be here. And I wonder if, when in that group, if they even had kind of the mental freedom to even consider it and even question, gosh, this doesn't seem to actually match our experience.
Right. Yeah.
Versus here in the United States, it's where the message is actually coming from. It's the origination point. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. I'm going to follow up on that. Stay tuned, everybody. Moving on to question 2. Who are the 144,000 in Revelation 14, 1-3?
Good. To answer that question, we probably have to go back to chapter 7, where the 144,000 are first introduced. And this is another one where, kind of to go back to last week, the last podcast discussion, we talked a little bit about what kind of book is Revelation, and the fact that to understand the images, we first of all, like we would any other biblical book, understand it in light of its first context, in light of what the author was trying to communicate, and the first readers would have understood. This is a good one, where this is one where often the 144,000 is identified with some specific group, usually, and those groups, whether it's I often think of what happened at Waco, Texas, and David Koresh. Anyone remembers that years and years ago? Groups like that identifying themselves as 144,000. But again, asking what, within Revelation, within its original context, what would that have been identified with? Without spending a lot of time trying to tease this out and unravel it, it appears to me that again, even the numbers that we talked about, the fact that Revelation is a book that communicates through metaphors and images and not literally. So I think that's true. The numbers, the number 144,000 is not the kind of thing that, if you have a group of people and you had a calculator, you could, get out your computer, iPad and add up and there'd be 144,000 exactly. But the 144,000, it's basically, it's a multiple of 12. And you go to look at Revelation, even throughout the Bible, 12 is a significant number. The 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 apostles, which were based on the 12 tribes of Israel. So 12 is the number of the people of God. And what I think he's doing is taking the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles, multiplying them to get 144, then times 1,000, a number of great magnitude. The 144,000, I think, just signifies it's another image for the people of God, the made up of Jews and Gentiles, the 12 tribes of Israel, but the 12 apostles of the Lamb. You see that in chapter 21 of Revelation, the New Jerusalem. The 12 gates are the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 foundations of the 12 apostles. What is that saying? Well, this is the final this is the people of God made up of Jew and Gentile alike. And so I think that 144,000 is just another image for the church, the new people of God made up of both Jew and Gentile. And the 144,000 is just a way of saying, here's the entirety, the full number of the magnitude of the people of God made up of Jew and Gentile. So I don't know that there's really any justification for taking that 144,000 and identifying it with any one specific group. But as much as taking it as this is an image of the entire people of God. And if you go back to chapter 7, where there's 12 tribes enumerated, the first one is the tribe of Judah, which we already know is that's the tribe of Jesus Christ. So it's as if the author's saying this group of 144,000 needs to be defined in light of the person of Jesus Christ. So he's taking Old Testament imagery and seeing it through the lens of Christ. The true people of God are now to be understood as Jews and Gentiles, all that have faith in Jesus Christ, now make up this great multitude of God's people in the present and in the future. So that's kind of how I understand the 144,000. There's probably a couple of other things we could say about that image. For example, the numbering of the tribes in chapter 7. That in the Old Testament, when the tribes of Israel would be numbered, it was to determine their military strength. So whenever a census of the tribes were taken in throughout the New Testament or the Old Testament, it was to count the number of fighting men, and so that's another reason for that image. It's why portray the church as 144,000? Why wouldn't that be literally the tribes of Israel? Well, it's because the author's taking an Old Testament image to say the people of God are a mighty army. They go out and do battle, yet ironically, they conquer and overcome. That's an important theme in Revelation, conquering and overcoming. The 7 messages to the churches in chapter 2 and 3 all end with, to the one who overcomes, to the one who conquers. The 144,000 is a way of portraying the church as a mighty army that conquers, it overcomes, but it does so through their suffering, faithful witness, not through military might and not through blowing things up or shooting, whatever, nuclear warfare or engaging in actual war. They conquer, they do battle against Satan and the beast through their suffering, faithful witness to Jesus Christ. So that's kind of, I think, what the image of the 144,000 is all about.
And in regards to the exact number itself, it totally flips what we get out of it upside down, because 144,000, when we look throughout history, that's not very many.
No, it is. You're exactly right.
And yet when we look at the fullness of how this number was arrived at, really the impression is it's big.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of people. And so it switches it from, oh gosh, there's so few, what are the odds of me getting in, to, wow, there's many.
You are exactly right. And thinking again in terms of these small churches in this huge Roman Empire, it'd be easy to feel that they're just a minority and they really don't matter and they have no impact. And so by portraying them, no, you're part of this large group, you're part of this mighty army that goes out and does battle, but through their faithful suffering witness, it's helping them. That's what an apocalypse does. It lifts the veil so they can see reality in a new light. No, they're not some no matter what the Roman world says, and no matter what the world says about them, they're not some insignificant group. And no, Naomi, you're exactly right. It portrays them as this large group, an army that goes out to do battle through their faithful suffering witness, just the same way the Lamb did. So
the feeling I get when I hear you talk about this is this feeling of not being alone. Mm-hmm. And I'm not even in the situation by any means. Here in the United States is the situation they were in. And so, yes, like these smaller churches and just goodness, the persecution that they were facing and getting going too. I mean, they didn't have a lot of history that they're going on. You know, we have so much church history. We have scholars like yourself. We have so much accessible to us. And to think about what they were facing at that time and how isolated that could feel. And yes, everything that you're saying just gives me this feeling of, okay, I'm not alone. You know, I'm tied to the 12 tribes. There's a connection to the apostles. There's this connection, of course, to Jesus, our Lord and Savior. And this is going to expand, you know, exponentially. And of course, they were seeing incredible growth despite their circumstances. And there's something motivating and empowering about the message. Right. Again, instead of how some groups interpret it today, which is like, we got to be perfect. We've got to give more. We have to do more works. We have to do all this stuff because we want to be one of the ones that's going to get in. Mm-hmm. And I think that image of an army too, the opposite of how these groups treat it is usually we're some isolated conclave we're meant to kind of hole up somewhere but no, it's this imagery of 144,000. We're an army that goes out into the world to witness, to carry on the faithful witness, even in the face of suffering. So it's the exact opposite of how some groups or cults often use that imagery. That's so true. And Dr. Mathewson, I've been really torn on how much to speak into that because they're doing it incorrectly. It's unbiblical. And my group was that way. It was not a group that was out proselytizing. It wasn't missional. It was very, okay, we're going to hide. And that struck me even as a teenager. I thought, but this doesn't match what we're supposed to, like, if we have the truth and we're the only few hundred that do, shouldn't we be going and telling everyone, you know, and like wanting them to know it too? And yet I look back and I'm so glad we didn't because it wasn't true. So I have this kind of catch-22 of, hey, you guys ought to be based on scripture, but yeah, please don't, because it's just going to harm more people. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. But so next question, what is the significance of the number 666? And I'm pulling this from Revelation 13:18 for anyone who's following along. Yeah, that's an easy one. No, just kidding. And again, to keep in mind that the two things we talked about with the 144,000, two principles that come right out of the kind of book Revelation is that I think even if these two principles don't help us to arrive at an exact understanding, it helps us to avoid a lot of, to be polite, nonsense that's been done with 666. And that is, again, number one, the numbers are meant to be images or metaphors to be treated for their symbolic value. And then number two, it must be something that the first readers would have grasped and understood. So when I see 666 referring to computer chips that could be embedded in you, or the vaccine, with the pandemic going on, or whatever,
the question is, would John and his readers ever picked up on this? Well, no, they wouldn't have. So what's going on with this? There's probably two things. Number one is that the number 666 actually, well, to go back, one thing you could do with Greek and Hebrew that we usually don't do with English is each of the letters of the alphabet had a numerical value. And sometimes you could use numbers and as kind of, I don't know how to really describe, kind of as a code for the spelling of a name. And the letters of a name, you add up the numerical value of those letters and you come up with the number, and that would be the way to kind of communicate someone's name. The other thing along with that is certain spellings of Nero, who was an emperor probably before the book of Revelation was written, and he's probably dead by the time Revelation is written. But Nero was one of the emperors who was particularly known for being a bad guy, and there's all kinds of stories of how awful Nero was, not only to his people but especially to Christians. So that there's actually certain spellings of Nero's name that add up to 666. And it's as if the author uses the numbers for Nero's name to uncover the true nature of the empire. It's sort of like he's saying, you want to know what the emperor and the Roman Empire is really like? Remember Nero. Go back to Nero. He kind of embodies the true spirit of the Roman Empire. And the taking on this number 666 is not so much taking on a literal stamp or tattoo or brand or something like that. Again, it's symbolic of identifying. It's a metaphor for identifying with and associating with the Roman Empire. And it's John's way of saying, churches like Laodicea that are making wealth off Rome and they're identifying with Rome, they're compromising with Rome. Look at what you're really compromising with. The number 666 is meant to say something about the true nature of Rome. The kind of Nero and all the bad things he did embodies the true spirit of Rome. And furthermore, 666, the other thing, it might the significance of it might be that it falls short of the perfect number 777. John himself says it's a number of man. So maybe the idea is, along with Nero, is it falls short of the perfect number 7. So again, it's a way of saying if the people that can't buy and sell, it says at the end of Revelation 13, unless they have this number 666. Well, that was true. Unless you completely identify and give your allegiance to Rome and throw your lot in with the Roman Empire, unless you do that and participate fully in its religion and economy, you can't do trade. You can't make a living. And so it's simply a way, again, of John lifting the veil, which is what apocalypse means, and say, let me show you the true nature of Rome, and perhaps not only Rome, but the whole world system that exists throughout all the centuries. 666 is a reminder of the true nature of a world system that is opposed to God, that is opposed to God's people, that is idolatrous, that is evil, that is oppressive and unjust. And 666 is simply a way of identifying that and calling us not to take that mark. That is, don't associate with that system. Don't identify with that, but be willing to resist it.
And when I think about the reality that they were living in at the time, to the best of my ability to grasp it, which I know falls short, I know in addition, they were reading this letter aloud. So that's something that I want to bring back up in relation to some of these metaphors. Now, yes, the nature of the book itself has metaphors, but this is also being read aloud. So maybe that's part of why it was written this way and why John was given it to him. It was given to him in this way. I'm wondering what you think about that. I mean, I don't want to speculate too much, but just this idea of it's being read aloud in these cities where, Roman rule is present. And so we don't necessarily want to stand up and say Nero just be that upfront about it. And so some form of code that maybe adds a bit of safety to get the message to people, because the goal again was to lift them up and remind them of this bigger picture. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's probably a little bit of truth of that. In other words, there are calls throughout, even in chapter 13, it says, for the one who has a mind, the one who has the ability to calculate. So there's a call even for the readers of Revelation. It's as if John holds them at a little bit at arm's length so that they will think about and they'll respond. And so it's kind of what Jesus was doing with the parables. He spoke parables. It kind of both revealed God's truth, but it concealed it just enough to cause the readers to have to think about it and respond. And I think that's true with Revelation. That's even for the first readers, for the churches. It revealed. That's what an apocalypse means, an unveiling or revealing. But it did so in a way that kind of it masked the truth just enough that they'd have to think about it, and that they would have to respond to it. In other words, it wasn't easy. They had to be involved in thinking about the truth and applying it. On the other hand, I don't know that John is intentionally trying to hide the whole book from Rome. Although I know that that's a fairly popular theory. When I look at Revelation, the more I read it, I think, if the emperor would have ever got his hands on this, I think he would have known what was going on. When he reads that Jesus is the king of the nation, is the Lord over the kings of the earth, or when he read what if the emperor were to get it and read chapter 4 and find there's a throne in heaven with all creation worshiping him, and that Jesus is the Savior, that God is the ruler of all things, and the beginning and the end reads language like that, I think he would understand that this is a direct challenge to my throne and my kingship. When he reads that the people of God are described as a kingdom of priests, there's another kingdom besides Rome? There's another empire besides the Roman Empire? So I think personally that not that he would have grasped everything, but I think that any authority that would have ever gotten their hands on Revelation would have known just enough to figure out that, hey, this is a direct assault on Roman rule and Roman authority and the kingdom and empire of Rome.
Right. Yeah, there's enough there that still would have gotten him fired up. So it's a good point. This next one has caused some unforgettable tragedy. I think of Heaven's Gate specifically. Who are the two witnesses in Revelation 11:3?
Good. Yeah. And you're right. This is another one that has been used to, I think, manipulate by identifying here are the two witnesses and calls to rally around them, and the result being to, being able to lead large groups of people to do all kinds of horrific things. Once more, I think the two witnesses, like everything else in Revelation, they're meant to be metaphors of somebody or something. So I don't think John is talking about two actual literal persons that will arise sometime in history or in the end times, any more than the way we refer to Uncle Sam. When we, as Americans, as United States citizens, we talk about Uncle Sam, we don't expect to go to Washington, D.C. and find some literal Uncle Sam walking around, unless you're watching a parade or something like that. But we understand Uncle Sam as a figure is a metaphor or symbol for something larger, the United States government, or something like that. The same is true with the two witnesses. I think the two witnesses are metaphor or a symbol of something greater. And that is, I think there's evidence right within Revelation that they are symbolic of the entire witnessing church. And that's what they do in chapter 11. And the reason for saying that is the two witnesses in chapter 11 of Revelation are identified as two lampstands. And back in chapter 1, Jesus already told us that the lampstands symbolize the church. Now, someone might ask, well, why are there two of them? Why just two witnesses? Well, if you go back to the 7 messages to the churches in Revelation 2 and 3, only 2 of the churches are faithful witnesses and are suffering because of that. And so that's why I think the 2 witnesses, John, or Jesus speaking through John, is using the two faithful churches back in chapters 2 and 3 as an example of what the church is supposed to be doing. And so again, chapter 11 is not so much a prediction of some end time scenario where there will be 2 people that will, do different things. It's more, I think chapter 11 is more of a command or a call for the church. Here's what you're supposed to be doing. You are to be God's faithful witnesses, even in the midst of suffering. And that's what happens. They get put to death, but they're vindicated and raised in the end. And I think that's the point. No matter what you face, is the church is called on every age to be a faithful witness. And in the end, God will vindicate them to show them that their witness was not in vain. And so again, I think in terms of what would the first readers have associated? How should we understand this image in the context of Revelation? Well, I think Jesus, speaking through John, is giving a call. This is kind of a call to the church. And again, the number 2 probably goes back to the fact that only 2 of the 7 churches in 2 and 3 are faithful, and they receive a positive evaluation from Jesus because of their witness. And they're suffering because of it. And that's what the church is called to do in chapter 11. So you kind of see throughout Revelation that the church is looked at from different angles with different metaphors. 144,000 looks at the church as a great multitude that goes out and does battle through its faithful witness. Now the church is looked at as a faithful prophetic witness, symbolized by these 2 witnesses. And there's they're called a kingdom of priests. So there's a variety of metaphors used to describe they all say something different about who are the people of God. What are they supposed to be doing during this time when the Roman government, or whatever government until Christ comes back, decides to unleash their fury on the people of God, or decide to tempt them to compromise? What's the church's response? What should they be doing? Each of these metaphors, 144,000, 2 witnesses, a kingdom of priests, whatever. The bride is another one, the bride New Jerusalem. All those say something about who the church is supposed to be and what they're supposed to do.
And you may feel like a bit of a broken record with some of it, just saying over and over again, this is not literal, but right. I'm glad you keep saying it again, because statistically, it's 7 times we hear something before it kind of sticks with us. And I don't say that flippantly. There are so many in our audience who have been hearing something, have heard a different message for so long, that continuing to show other ways to look at this, and likely more accurate ways to look at this, is just really important for them to keep hearing. So feel free to keep saying it.
Good. And you're right, because especially among Christian readers, you often find, well, doesn't that take the Bible less seriously? Isn't that subjective or whatever? But we're not treating it symbolically or metaphorically and non-literally just because we want to, or we don't know what to do with it. No, that's the kind of book Revelation is. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't treat other books that way, but that's the kind of literature Revelation is. And so I think it's taking the Bible more seriously to treat Revelation symbolically or metaphorically, because that's the kind of literature God has chosen to communicate the book of Revelation through.
Right. Just like reading the Psalms as being poetic. I mean, we want to read it the way it's meant to be written. Like, I mean, what if I read a fiction book as if it were nonfiction? Right. I mean, that's problematic.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So we want to know what genre we're in.
Right.
I'm going to jump ahead because you just mentioned New Jerusalem. So I'm going to skip down to that question because you just brought it up. So what is the New Jerusalem? And within that, do you think that the nation of Israel has a special destiny of some kind?
Good. Yeah. Another easy question to answer. Those are really good questions. The New Jerusalem, you find it mentioned briefly in one of the, I can't remember which one off the top of my head, one of the 7 messages to the churches, but then it occurs in chapter 21 and 22 as the final vision of the New Jerusalem. And again, I don't want to say there's not going to be a city, a main city or literal city or cities in the New Jerusalem, but in the new creation, when Christ returns and creates all things new. But in 21, I take Revelation, the New Jerusalem as, and I think Revelation requires this and points in this direction as a metaphor primarily for the people themselves. And you see this because, to kind of follow the thread, the New Jerusalem is also called the bride, which back in chapter 19, John makes it pretty clear the bride is the people themselves. And so you kind of add that up. The New Jerusalem equals the bride, which equals the people of God. So the New Jerusalem is probably not primarily referring to a place, but referring to a people. So that this is another metaphor for describing the perfected people of God. And you look elsewhere in the New Testament, other authors do this. They use building imagery to describe metaphorically the people. Look at Ephesians chapter 2, the very last couple of verses of Ephesians chapter 2, 19 through 22. It uses building imagery, house imagery to describe the people and the people of God. And we are the stones being built up. 1 Peter chapter 2, we are stones that are being built up into a holy dwelling for God, into a house where God dwells. The book of Hebrews calls the people of God a house. So it's not uncommon elsewhere in the New Testament for authors to use building imagery, temple or city or house, to refer to metaphorically to the people. And I think that's what's going on in Revelation 21. The New Jerusalem is primarily a metaphor or symbol for the people themselves. And again, John tells you that by equating the New Jerusalem in verse 21, verse 9 and 10 with the bride. The New Jerusalem is the adorned bride. And he's already told us back in chapter 19, the bride is the people themselves, a metaphor. And you find that all over you find that in Ephesians 5, the church is compared to a bride. The bride imagery was marriage imagery. The people of God as a bride was in the Old Testament prophets all over. And so John's picking up on that and saying the bride, the New Jerusalem, is now a metaphor for the end time people of God.
Revelation is such a prime example of the importance of reading the passage, not even just within its own chapter, but within the book.
Right. Yeah.
Because all of these different mentions that tie together, it would be so easy for someone to cherry pick by accident in the book of Revelation. And so when we're talking about things being taken out of context from this book, I would just want our audience to know it's not necessarily done intentionally in every situation. It's a big book to take on. And there's a responsibility that we have to make sure that we are reading it to the best of our ability, and that we are bringing in people who know more than we do and seeking that wise counsel on what to do with it all. So I don't say it as an excuse for leaders who have used it incorrectly, but I do want to say that it can happen, and it can happen unintentionally. And so that's where each of us have a personal responsibility to investigating on our own, because at the end of the day, yes, leaders are held to a higher level of accountability. Teachers are, we're told that in scripture. And yet I don't want to be led astray because I just listened to someone else. I, at the end of the day, have the ability to read this too and to seek out resources and support. So I just want to give that disclaimer of, by no means are we wanting to attack people who have genuinely been like, I just missed that. Even leaders have been like, oh my gosh, like I never caught that. I was taught this and I carried it on. There's an opportunity to repent and to correct and for reconciliation. And we always want that within the church. And
that's the same with me. I find out things that I think I read this wrong. And I'll read Revelation again and I'm not sure. And some are less consequential than others, but still I'll learn, I'll see things and no, I don't think I understood that right. And I need to correct and revise. Or I'll read somebody else, some other scholar or some person on Revelation, and I never thought about that way. I think I need to revise how I think about this. So it's an ongoing, it's one of those books where, as I say, probably one of the most important interpretive principles for reading Revelation as a whole, but any section, is to approach it with extreme humility because of the kind of book it is and because of the way it's been treated, even abused, and because of some of the disagreement is I can't pretend that I'm going to figure every last detail out. So I need to approach it with humility. I need to be open to learning from others.
Right. And I think you just hit on the biggest red flag with this book is when a leader is teaching on it without humility.
Right.
When a leader is saying, this is it. And so this is how your life has to be dictated because this is for certain. We want a level of humility. And if we don't see that, that's our biggest red flag. That's our biggest concern.
I agree. Yeah.
What are the seal, trumpet, and bowl judgments? Do you mind speaking about those a bit?
Yeah. Let me start with the seal, the seal judgments. And again, to play the broken record, if that's the right way to describe it, is I take the seal, trumpets, and bowls again as they're referring to actual judgments, but they're describing them in images and metaphors, not literally. And I think all kinds of both misunderstanding and harm has been done by trying to figure out exactly what is this referring to in our 21st century world and things like that. And then sometimes we end up vilifying other people or nations or whatever because we see them somehow fitting in with the perpetrators of these judgments or something like that. But so first of all, I do take it that the seals, trumpets, and bowls, these are three series of actual judgments by God on humanity, but not necessarily described in literal fashion so that we can say, aha, I see, I don't know how many people I've had. I just talked to someone not long ago. I was actually presenting to a church not long ago to a large group of teachers who were planning on going through Revelation. And one person said, but today we know exactly what the trumpets are referring to. We can see in our own day. And I thought, first of all, the problem is that means that nobody else has ever understood it until the 21st century. And has everybody else throughout church history been in the dark about Revelation and these judgments until all of a sudden in the 21st century? Now we have the key to understanding it. That seems to be a very prideful approach to Revelation, a very parochial approach and narrow-minded. So again, the other thing that in light of that, we need to understand in light of what sense would the first readers have made out of this? What would they have identified this with? Again, we're not looking for what, this is a literal description. When you get things like hail mixed with fire and the sun, a third of the sun darkened, how does that happen? And I know people try to come up with scientific explanations, but again, then you've removed it from what would the first readers have? Again, John is writing a letter to them, has a prophetic message, an unveiling, an apocalypse to help them make sense of their world. How's this going to make sense to them? So I want to ask what most likely would they have identified this with? And although it's referring to actual judgments, it describes them metaphorically with images that would have recalled judgment and suggested judgment and in the minds of the first readers. For example, when you get to the trumpets and the bowl judgments, almost everybody I've tested this out on in a church setting or wherever, in seminary class, college classroom, Sunday school classes, whatever, they've been able to catch on. You read through the plagues of the trumpets, 7 trumpets and the 7 bowls, is what series of plagues did that recall? When you read about the sun being darkened, you read about frogs coming out, you read about sores, you read about water turning to blood. It recalls the Exodus plagues. So what's John doing? Basically, the message is not, here's a little literal description of 7 judgments that are coming. It's more, the message is more in the same way that God judged Egypt, an oppressive nation of Egypt through its plagues. In the same way, God is going to judge another oppressive empire, Rome, and any other empire that chooses to fall in line with that and act like Rome did and Egypt and become oppressive and godless and set itself up as God and demanding worship and oppressing God's people and being unjust. The message of the 7 bowls and plagues, trumpets especially, is trumpets and bowls, get my order right, it is just that. In the same way God judged a wicked empire in the past, Egypt, so you can be sure he will judge any other empire that acts the part of Egypt, or in our case now, in the case of Revelation, Rome. What the judgments look like, I don't even know that John is concerned with saying, here's exactly what they will look like. And again, the number 7 is the most famous symbolic number in Revelation. 7 suggests perfection, completion. So I'm not even sure John is saying, here's 7 actual plagues that will occur in that order. 7 is the number of completion or perfection. So this is the perfect, complete expression of God's judgment on humanity. If you go back to the seals, again, without going into a lot of detail, the seals seem to be specifically aimed at God's judgment on the Roman Empire. The fact that the first 4 seals are identified with the horsemen that come out. Certainly, John's not describing 7 literal horses, or 4 literal horses with riders that will ride out at some period of time. It's what they symbolize. Then the color of the horse is what they symbolize. One of them symbolizes bloodshed and taking away peace. This would have been an attack on Rome that promised peace, the so-called Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. Rome promised and offered peace, but it did so at a great cost. Again, John's lifting the veil. Yeah, you want to see what Rome's really like? Under that claim to offer peace is the sword, is bloodshed, is warfare, is conflict. And even the seal, the 3rd seal, where there's a scale and this exorbitant price for wheat, I think that's just describing an economy that's out of whack because of Rome's desire and thirst for wealth and everything. Is now you have an economy that's out of whack. It's almost as if in the seals, trumpets, and bowls, it's almost as if John is saying something similar to what Paul said in Romans chapter 1. The wrath of God is being revealed. How is it being revealed? 3 times in Romans 1:18 and following, he repeats this phrase, and God handed them over. God gave them over. So what I think you have going on in all these 3 series is God is pouring out his judgment, whatever it looks like, in the Roman Empire, and will continue to do so until he comes back. God is pouring out his judgment by handing humanity over to their own, a society that chooses to be idolatrous and murderous and oppressive and unjust and only operating for its own benefit and its own thirst and hunger for power and authority and wealth. Is God gives them over to that and allows them to reap the benefits negatively, of course, of that. So I think that's what's going on. And then furthermore, I think these judgments are what I like to call warning shots. They're warnings of the final judgment to come. At the end of the trumpet and bowl judgments, it says, and humanity still did not repent. So in a sense, although these are mainly true judgments, they also seem to be warnings that are meant to call humanity to repent. And unfortunately, most of them don't. So these are kind of preludes to or snapshots of a coming final judgment, which happens in chapter 19 and 20 at the end of the book. And again, I think the message is God, through these judgments, and the same way God judged Egypt, and in the same way that God judges any evil, wicked nation or empire, is now God is pouring out his judgment on humanity, starting in the first century with Rome, and will probably continue to do so. So that these aren't referring to some period at the very end, but probably describing, increasingly intensive process of God pouring out his judgment by allowing humanity to reap the consequences of their decisions when they choose to try to set up heaven on earth and leave God out of the picture. And so that's kind of what in preparation for and anticipating and warning of the final judgment, which is to come. So that's kind of how I see the series of judgments.
It just struck me that some of the groups that I'm aware of actually are using the book of Revelation in ways that are in direct contradiction to the point of the message of Revelation. I just kind of got sidetracked by that for a second. Like, gosh, I mean, of course that happens, but I won't get into specific examples, but yeah, it's actually they're using it in direct conflict where they're trying to create their heaven on earth situation. And in the way that they're doing it, just they're not living out the actual gospel message.
Right. And that's a good point. I think that's true, especially with these three series of judgments. But, any section of Revelation is not, I think we run into problems when we get so bogged down with trying to figure out every detail and that we miss the bigger picture. What's the main message of those seven judgments? And again, I think it's, in the same way God judged Egypt, so he's going to judge Rome and any other, including my own nation, including my own, whatever I associate with is. I think we miss that when we try to get bogged down with it. I've got to figure out, decode every little tiny detail. And I think that's sometimes where you run into problems, and sometimes where you start getting into rather drastic interpretations and consequences that result from that.
Yes, absolutely. And the reason I pulled these questions is because there are specifics where people are doing exactly that. And so I really appreciate all of your time in studying and you even being here to help show people there's another way to go about this. And here's what's most important. And here's how what's most important does still apply to today, because there is application to today.
That's right. Yeah.
And we don't want to miss that because we're so like in these minute details and we're missing then the big picture.
Yeah.
Who is the beast and what is the mark of the beast?
I remember one time I had when I was pastoring in Montana, I had an individual tell me the book of Revelation came up, and he told me, he said, I know we're not in the end times because I don't see any beast running around on earth. And he was dead serious. An example taking Revelation with strict literalness. So obviously, I don't know of anyone that would say the beast refers to a literal seven-headed beast that's described exactly how he is in chapter 13. So again, we need to I think that's a really easy example of how Revelation is communicating metaphorically. And again, we need to understand, well, what would the first readers have made of this? The main thing is this image of a beast is not something new with John. If you go back to the Old Testament, in some of the Psalms and even prophets, you find beast or dragon or snake-like figures used of empires or rulers like Egypt, or other oppressive, ungodly, idolatrous, murderous empires. You find beast figures used of them, and in some Jewish literature between the Old and New Testament, you'll often find beastly imagery or image of beast or dragons or something referring to human rulers or human nations. So this isn't anything new with John. And again, just ask yourself, if you're a Christian living in the first century Roman Empire, who are you going to probably associate this beast with? Probably Rome and or its emperor, because you would probably be familiar with these Old Testament texts and maybe some of this other Jewish literature where beast or dragon-like figures are used of rulers and nations or empires in the past. And so you're going to associate it most likely with your own empire and your own, the emperor that you are living under. And so what is John doing? Well, once more, Rome makes all these grand claims. So Rome claims to bring salvation to the earth. It claims to bring peace. It claims to, it brings economic prosperity for those who come under its rule. It offers all these things. And so again, this is another way of John saying, let me lift the veil and show you the true nature of Rome. That same hideous beast that reared its ugly head in Egypt and other empires in the past is now surfacing in the form of the Roman Empire, and apparently will continue to surface. Without John actually seeing other nations, he at least sees that this beast will still be present until Christ returns. But for him, it's now present in the form of the Roman Empire, and he wants his people to see that. The beast carried ideas of evil and chaos and oppression and idolatry, ungodliness, all those. And that's exactly how John wants, just even generally just horror and ugliness. And that's how John wants his readers to see Rome. It's not all it's cracked up to be. The same beastly power that we saw in other nations in the past is now present again in Rome. So are you so sure you want to identify with it? Are you so sure you want to give allegiance to the emperor? Are you so sure that you want to make a living off its and become wealthy off its economy, like the church at Laodicea was doing in chapter 3? So, and again, we can see, and this is where you have to be careful, because John is not predicting future beasts, but certainly we can see, some people use phrases like, if the cap fits, wear it, or if the shoe fits, wear it. Those for whom the beast fits, any nations or people or empires, whether it's our own or others, if it fits, there's where the beast is present. Wherever we see oppression and idolatry and setting itself up as divine and as God, making claims that only belong to God, evil, wherever we see that, there we see the beast emerging.
Yeah, and I totally thought that you said if the cat fits to wear.
Oh, the cat. That may be another way. The cat.
Cap. Yeah, I was like, the cat fits, wear it. All right.
The cat fits. That's an old saying that some of you remember. The cat fits.
I've definitely heard that one. Yeah. And so if we're carrying that over through into the mark of the beast, Do you mind giving an example of how you would see that today, say here in the United States for listeners here in North America? What would be an example of the mark of the beast in how we're living? Or do you think there is an application?
That's a good, I think there is. It'd be hard to give a real specific example, but I think it would, the mark of the beast might manifest itself when we, and again, I don't want to, I don't want to be too specific, but for example, being involved in an economic practice that is evil and is oppressing others, or where along with that, the pursuit of wealth in that practice becomes idolatrous. Is something like that can be an example of how the beast is, or the mark of the beast is again, the mark suggesting identifying with, where I am identifying with what the beast signifies.
That's great. Thank you.
That makes sense. And again, that causes a lot of discernment, or requires a lot of discernment, which is what Revelation calls for. He who has ears to hear, let to hear what the Spirit is saying, this calls for wisdom. You find that all throughout Revelation. So it's not like we can read this and, that empire fits, or this fits. It calls for discernment to see where do I see, and it first starts by understanding what is the beast, and what is John intending. It stands for an idolatrous, oppressive, and just murderous empire that sets itself up as worthy of worship and allegiance. Where do I see that today in my own life, in my own world, my own nation, anywhere else? Where do I see that? And the call to resist that and not be part of that, no matter what consequences it might bring.
I have seen this be taken to such a degree that it's just flat out demonic. So the beast and the mark of the beast is just flat out demonic, as in there's no potential for turnaround. There's no potential for salvation, for repentance, reconciliation, none of that. It's not even possible. And I've seen that then be applied to people who maybe get caught up in something. And not just the implication, what then happens, the fallout is mission stops, attempts at loving well stop, attempts at, correcting behavior, pointing out blind spots, trying to guide someone back into right living, as in accordance with scripture. All of that shuts down. It's like, this is bad, that person's bad. And they're not only on a bad path and they've made bad decisions, but they have the mark of the beast. Like, we're done with them. Yeah. They are 666, whatever that means. And we're done and we're walking away. And that is the heartbreaking result of taking some of this too far. Yeah. Not only maybe, even if the application isn't totally wrong, just taking it to such an extreme that it stops us from being who God called us to be. It stops us from loving our neighbors as we're called to. And that's just such a tragic fallout. I think people need to be cautious of.
You're exactly right. And two things address that. Number one is going back to the two witnesses, and going back to, what is the problem with the churches in chapters 2 and 3, at least the 5 that get a rather negative report from evaluation from Jesus, is it's the issue of faithful witness. What is the church called to be when they're called a kingdom of priests? What does that mean? Well, they go out and they witness to the reality of God's kingdom in this world. They witness to the reality, the truth of the gospel, of the truth of who Jesus is and who God is. And then it's interesting. The other interesting thing is, at the very end of the book in chapter 21, who who ends up in the New Jerusalem? It's interesting. It's the nations of the earth, those that were under the sway of the beast and the dragon. Now, some of them apparently end up in the new creation. So the whole idea of referring to Rome as a beast or referring to anybody like that, it's not to vilify them or to say, they're beyond help and ignore them or put them in this category and cast them aside. No, that's the whole purpose of the church is in a world where Satan, in chapter, the two beasts that you mentioned are found in chapter 3, or chapter 13. But before that, the overarching authority over the two beasts is the dragon Satan. And the whole, one of the main themes of Revelation seems to me to be what is the role of the church in a world that is ruled by Satan, and where these beastly powers like Rome or whoever under the control of Satan, where they rule and are oppressive and unjust and set themselves up as God. What is the rule of the church? It's to be a faithful witness to an alternative kingdom and to an alternative ruler who's Jesus Christ the Lamb and God. So it seems just the opposite in Revelation. It's not so much a gloom and doom. Well, you're doomed to judgment because you belong to the beast and you're demonic. No, that's the reason why the church is called to be a faithful witness, to provide a counter message, a counter kingdom, a counter rule that men and women can enter through a relationship with the Lamb. And so the church's role is just the opposite. It's to witness, be a faithful witness to the nations, so that they can eventually also end up in the new creation in Revelation 21, 22.
That's beautiful. Thank you. We're in the home stretch. We have a few left. We're almost there.
Oh, this is fun.
Who is I feel like I'm doing some sort of like not rapid question, but the idea of that we're just not doing it rapidly, which is fine.
But sooner or later, you're going to get a question I can't. Not that I've answered them all well, but you're going to get one off. I'm not sure about that one.
Who is the Antichrist?
Yeah. So obviously the beast is the one that's called the Antichrist. I kind of take to kind of broaden out beyond Revelation. I take a statement in 1 John, and it's escaping me. I think it's in chapter 2. 1 John, where John says to his readers, "You've heard that the Antichrist is coming. I tell you that many Antichrists have already come." So it's the idea that again, this beastly figure, which stands for the Antichrist, one day will, kind of emerge in its final form and whatever that will look like, and Christ will do away with it according to Revelation. But in the meantime, many antichrists have already risen, such as the Roman Empire. So I think for John and his readers, the Roman Empire and the emperor were the embodiment of the Antichrist at that time. And again, John is not saying, here's the Antichrist and let me predict how long it'll go on, and then finally Christ will put it to an end. But simply John is saying, yes, the Antichrist, which is I think just the beast, will continue to oppose God's people and emerge throughout history until Christ puts it to an end. But for John and his readers, the Antichrist that John's which I think is the same author in 1 John, where he says, "You've heard the Antichrist is coming." That's the final manifestation of the Antichrist. But he says, "But I tell you, many Antichrists have already come," which for him was false teachers in the church in 1 John. But for John, for writing Revelation, for him, it would have been the Roman Empire of his day.
Who are Gog and Magog?
Gog and Magog are two rocks that are sit above Manitou Springs and Colorado Springs. There's actually two rocks called Gog and Magog. I haven't read the history to find out who decided that. But,
so for anyone who wants to meet them.
That's right. But to be more serious and get back to Revelation, the Gog and Magog occur in, first of all, it's an imagery that John gets from Ezekiel. As we've said, I think before, a lot of John's imagery, his metaphors and symbols, come out of the Old Testament, especially prophetic texts. And Gog and Magog come from Ezekiel 38 and 39, I believe it is. And John uses that in chapter 20 in a language of the final battle. And I think John is pretty clear by describing, he also describes Gog and Magog as the four corners of the earth. So Gog and Magog, again, for John, become a metaphor of the entire world in opposition to God. So again, I don't think John is interested in giving us a nice detailed picture of a video of exactly what this is going to look like. But I think, again, John's taking Old Testament imagery to say, in the end, God will come to a world that opposes him under the rule of the dragon. And in a final battle, he will put it to an end. And again, we see that picture of I call it the greatest battle never fought, because it's a battle, but there's really no fighting takes place. God just comes down and destroys the opposition without any fighting. So I think Gog and Magog are a language image taken out of the Old Testament now to refer to the entire world. The four corners of the earth was an image of the whole world as opposed to God. And under the sway of the dragon, Satan, that God will come and bring about judgment.
Mm-hmm. For anyone who's listening, who is thrown by what he just said there about there is really no battle. We talked about the Battle of Armageddon in part 1. So I'd refer you back there if that seems in contradiction to what you've been told, so you can hear what he had to say about that. All right, last two. What are the seven thunders in Revelation 10:3 through 4?
What is intriguing about this one is that there are seven thunders, and John says, I was about to write it, and then a voice said, don't write these. And so at one level, we cannot be sure exactly what they were. And there's at least two things that could be going on. Number one, these may have been seven further judgments, like the seven bowls, the seven trumpets, I'm getting the right order. Seven seals, seven trumpets, seven bowls. This may have been another series of seven judgments that for some reason John is now not allowed to, or told not to write down. The other thing that impacts me or makes me think is that the fact that John is told not to write it down means that we don't know everything about the book of Revelation. It's another call for humility. Here's something that I have no idea what it's about. And so I need to, and by saying humility, it's not that I'm not going to try with the book. I'm not going to figure out anything in Revelation. I'll leave that to someone else, or worse, I'll ignore the book. It just means, no, we need to be humble. We need to realize that we don't know everything about the book. And this, whether that was John's intention or not, the fact that he's not allowed to write down these seven thunders means that there's information that's missing to us, that we don't know everything there is to know about the book. And so another reason to approach it humbly. Right. So those might be two of the reasons why, or for explanations for the seven thunders that John is told not to write down after he hears them.
Mm-hmm. And yet we trust that we know what we need to.
That's right.
Given what we need.
That's exactly right. Certainly God has revealed everything we need to know, but maybe that's just something he's stuck in there to say, but don't think that you can figure everything out.
Yeah. This one's causing problems actively right now, as it likely has throughout history. Who is the seventh angel in Revelation 10:7?
The seventh angel in 10:7. Let me grab.
Sure. And while you're doing that, so there are groups who are claiming a teacher that they have is the prophet who is in some way basically the fulfillment of the seventh angel. So they're claiming their leader is the seventh angel kind of manifested in human form, and that is their prophet right now.
Yeah. There's a reason why it's called the angel's called the seventh, because we're right in the middle. And this happens, it doesn't happen with the bowls, but it happens with the seals and the trumpets. When you read Revelation, the first six seals get divulged, and then there's a delay until the seventh, and there's more information comes in between. The same is true with the trumpets. In chapters 8 and 9, which is where these trumpet plagues get unleashed, these trumpet judgments, you only find 6 of them getting divulged by the end of chapter 9. And then you have this section in chapters 10 and 11 being the 2 witnesses, that all this information coming, and you're wondering, where's the 7th trumpet? Well, the seventh angel isn't anybody's, special or to be identified with any specific person any more than the first 6 angels are to be identified with any specific person in history or any individual. This is just the 7th angel who sounds the trumpet for the 7th last plague. And you actually find that you find the 7th trumpet finally being blown in verse 15 of chapter 11. It says, the 7th angel, there he is again, the 7th angel, sounded his trumpet. So the first 6 trumpets went off in chapters 8 and 9, and then there's a delay, and finally the 7th trumpet gets blown. But this 7th angel has another job in chapter 10 before he blows his trumpet, and that is to come to John with a message. Let's see, you said verse 7, there it is. But in the days when the 7th angel, that's not some specific random individual who wanders in the scene. It's the 7th, after the 6 angels sound their trumpet, here's the 7th one. And you would almost expect at this point, if you're a reader of Revelation, you expect, here's plague number 7, here's trumpet number 7. But that's not what you find. Instead, he tells John, or John says, in the days when the 7th angel is about to sound his trumpet, the mystery of God will be accomplished, just as he announced his servants, the prophets. So it's as if this is simply kind of preparing you for the fact that the 7th angel will sound his trumpet later on. So which he does in 11 verses 15 and following. There you finally find the 7th trumpet. So I don't know if I'm making sense, but the whole point is that this is just the 7th angel in that series of, you have 6 seals, now you have 7 trumpets, and then you're going to have 7 bowls, 7 angels that pour out the bowls. So this is just an angel that has a specific role in the book of Revelation that belongs with those other 6 that blow the trumpets. It's not to be identified with any specific person or historical persons. And so I agree. That's just another real good example when we don't pay attention to the context and what's going on. It's easy to take a detail like this and start to identify it with certain things that John and his readers would have never intended or never have understood.
Right. And so I'm thinking of one specific group right now where their prophet, quote unquote, is that 7th angel, and him blowing the trumpet is him kind of calling out for repentance of follow what I'm saying, adhere to these standards and restrictions and expectations that I'm placing upon the group, because this is kind of the last call. This is sort of your last shot, and this is it. And I am that final angel, blowing that trumpet and heralding this message for the final time. And so it sounds like what you're saying is there's just no evidence that supports this being a literal person here on earth who is doing this.
And in the book, and this is true of kind of apocalypses more generally, but in the book of Revelation, angels angels always refer to angels, kind of angelic, supernatural beings. They never refer to human beings. And to, what I always wonder, well, why don't people identify the other 6 angels in chapters 8 and 9? Well, maybe there are some groups that do, but why do we single out one and say, our prophet or this person, our leader, is that 7th angel? But again, and that message is certainly true, a message of repentance, but that's in Revelation, in the whole trumpet sequence, not just some individual calling, and again, calling for the whole world, calling for everyone to repent. It's not just for some specific group. But again, angels always refer to angels in the book of Revelation, and I never find them referring to actual persons on earth.
Right. There's a difference when we look back in the biblical text where we see that angels came to earth and they walked and they interacted. Think of Abram, having a conversation. Right. That's not the same as someone being born and having parents and living a whole life and then dying eventually. Right. It's not, we can't draw a parallel there.
That's right. Yeah.
You can call that the same. Well, it took all the way to the last question to trip you up a little bit. I'm impressed.
Well, yeah, I'm sure without much work, you could trip me up some more.
So in closing, after we've done 2 episodes together, we've had 2 conversations, what would be your sort of overarching words of wisdom to those who are listening, who are struggling with the details of this book?
Yeah, I would say, again, and I do this myself, and even when I teach the book, I would say, don't get too infatuated with all the details. Is focus on the overall message of the book. Revelation, I think I've hinted at this before, but usually when we think of Revelation, we think end times. But man, Revelation has so much to say about the person of Christ. It has so much to say about who God is. It has so much to say about what it means to be the church, the people of God. It has so much to say about following Jesus in obedience and discipleship. And it just has so much to say about worship. If we would focus on the broader themes and the hope that Revelation provides, and not get too bogged down with the details, or at least hold them loosely, I think we'd be far ahead, and Revelation would make a lot more sense to us, and I think we'd find a lot more value and help in reading it, and hopefully even avoid some of the extremes that are done with it. So that'd be kind of my message is focus on the main message, the main picture, and don't get too bogged down with or infatuated in an unhealthy way, at least with all, trying to figure out every last detail in the book.